Recording from NLP Logix AI Collaborate 2022 conference where data science is a team sport.
So Rebecca and Lori, welcome to the series. Thanks for being here.
Thanks very much for having us.
Thanks for having us in.
Of course. I'm excited to get into our use cases and sort of some of the meat and potatoes of your AI journey. But I want to start off with the same question we've opened all of our interviews in this series with. What put AI and data science on the table as a business priority? Obviously, AI is not worth doing just for its own sake. You guys must have seen an opportunity or a challenge that made AI relevant. What was that for you guys?
Well, Opptly was one out of a professional staffing firm. And at that time, the staffing firms were looking for technology to automate the sourcing process, if you will. And when Opptly became the technology, we wanted to reduce the friction between talent and work, right? So that was the business premise for how do we use AI to reduce that friction, make accurate matches, and do that in an accelerated fashion. So, and we engage NLP, they help us write the early models, they've iterated with us since, we've built new AI models along the way to specific use cases that we can talk about later. And we've also built our first application with NLP as well for the candidate. So really, I think the initial business opportunity was exactly that. How do we reduce the friction and connect the dots between talent and work? And how do we make that an efficient, effective process was the most important thing. I mean, that's our mission. And we wanted to fuel that with technology and AI models, and NLP became our partner in doing that. So we wanted our AI to be proprietary because we wanted the flexibility and agility to build AI models and applications that were not only consistent with our own roadmap that we had complete control over, but was agile enough that we could build AI models and applications to client-specific use cases. And as you all know, in the world of AI, the AI is only effective as the time that it takes to learn and grow and evolve. So we're taking full advantage of that and have the benefit of being seeded with millions of profiles and resumes very early on. So we're in a good place to continue that evolution.
Yeah, I would add to that, in addition to the external value that Lori just described, I think fundamentally the replicating the early work of a recruiter in the process was kind of a fundamental goal, right? What the recruiting process, the talent acquisition process is so human intensive. There's lots of steps. So I think one of the fundamental goals in the early days was how do we replicate at least part of that work so that we could refocus the recruiter's time on the things that will always remain needing to be sort of human to human. So that was sort of some of the fundamental work early on, in addition to kind of the external value that Lori described.
Absolutely agree. The silver lining in what Rebecca's saying is that the folks that were in the transactional part of the recruitment process now have an opportunity to kind of do higher value work, right? Have that cultural conversation with the candidate and do relationship management with the client and maybe organic growth off the desk and have a negotiation around compensation for that particular candidate. So we think that the silver lining is that, the professional development that comes along with the fact that that the staff's no longer doing like that transactional work, but really having more time and resources to do that higher value add.
And I think when part of the question that you asked was around, why is AI or data science a good solution for this business problem? I think one of the other things is the consistency that you can get out of an AI model that you can't get out of a set of humans, right? So if you have 10 recruiters that are doing work for an organization, they're all applying their own human experience, the amount of time they've spent doing it, some degree of bias in selection, right? So if you can automate that front end of the process with AI, not only is it way more efficient, but it's way more consistent. So that was just a good reason, to use AI and data science as part of the solution, versus let's just outsource or something like that to a whole bunch more humans at a lower cost.
Yeah.
How do we use technology to move it forward?
Okay, so it seemed like it was the right tool for the job. It seems that there was a way to improve our kind of matching, by leveraging algorithms. And it sounds like for you guys, it was also important to make sure that your own staff was focused on those higher complexity, personal-oriented tasks as opposed to being mired in sort of the nuts and bolts automatable stuff.
it's a client staff really, right? So the AI is enabled to support the client's matching needs, and then whoever's being the curator, whether or not that's the client or a curation partner or whatever the case may be, those folks are able to do that higher value work.
Got it. Okay. So it's helping their workflow become less monotonous and more, as you had mentioned, high value. You mentioned talking about culture, compensation, things that are more high touch and less sort of rote. So this takes us into the use case. I imagine there might be multiple ways to slice this. You guys can pick the use cases you want to talk about. There might be a view from the candidate's perspective, a view from your client's perspective. Talk about maybe which use case you want to dive into first in terms of where this stuff started hitting the ground running.
Yeah, I think we'll start with what we just released. So we're excited to share that we just recently announced in partnership with NLP, they built it, Opptly.connect, which is our newly released candidate application. And the use case there is that the candidate once was posting for a job and hoping for some return, not having any idea of where their resume went, if anyone looked at it, what jobs they might have been considered for, where they are in that funnel, if it was even correct, and had no real way of efficiently updating their skills, or never have the opportunity to get some consultation about what they might want to think about in terms of additional skills. So we released Opptly.connect, and the candidate app does all of those things, right? So it's an AI-powered user experience that we developed in an application. Again, kind of removing the friction between talent and work. Direct connect technology, which is a persona-driven thing, right? So our persona being the candidate. We at Opptly believe that the candidate is the universal asset in terms of workforce, talent broadly, Opptly in general, and really the most critical thing that we need to think about in the workforce industry. So this allows the candidate to register, update a resume and or a profile. It gives them access to a preference page where they can update their preferences, whether or not that be geography or their work style preference for us is, do you want to work in contingent labor? Do you want to work a permanent job? Do you want to work part-time? Do you want to work in remote? And that gives them the opportunity to update the preference and literally in the moment tell the AI, right? Inform the AI, even though they don't necessarily know that they are open to these kinds of new things, or that they've made a change in their work style preferences without ever having to upload anything really clunky again. No additional resumes, no additional profiles, etc. It allows them to look at the opportunities that match to their skills. Our AI is skills-based. It also considers the contextual nature and how to use those skills so that we're highly accurate in our matches. So it gives them a page of opportunities, if you will, in which they can opt in. They will see the full job description within the application. They will see the skills that they have that perfectly match. And they'll also see skills that, if they had, would even make them a better match for that job. So in some ways, it becomes very consultative. And it gives them a status dashboard as to where they are in the process in each of the opportunities that they opted into. So really, I would say, Rebecca, that the use case was the candidate, which we see as the most critical asset in the talent acquisition process.
It's about putting the candidate in the driver's seat, letting them own their own persona, right? So I think the days are a bit behind us where there's always the necessity for a candidate to have to be represented by somebody. So you hear a lot more about, the concept of direct sourcing and really just getting the talent, to Lori's point, closer to the work. And this really enables us to do that, keep the candidate in charge of how they're viewed, what skills they want to present to the AI. I mean, we all know it's not the same. You might want to present yourself for one opportunity slightly differently than you would another opportunity. So, you don't want someone making those decisions for you. So this really keeps the candidate in control of how they're presented. So really meaningful, important that we keep the candidate top of mind in everything we do, from a guiding principle standpoint. So yeah, excited to have the candidate app launching.
Got it. Okay. And it sounds as though there was something that was mentioned here around not only being able to detect skills, but being able to put them in context. Is that part of what the AI is serving to do, or is that more of an options-based setting there in terms of not only am I good at sales, I'm good at sales in this context. Not only am I good at stocking shelves, but good at stocking shelves in this context. Is that done with AI or is that more kind of baked into the software there?
Yeah, no, that's done with AI, and that's really a fundamental differentiator, versus historically when you might be searching for people, you're doing kind of a word-to-word match. So the AI is sophisticated enough to know, well, not only do you have this skill, but how do you apply it in your day-to-day work, right? So we all know, we've all been in that situation where we get a job recommendation on a software in our email that really is kind of unrelated to what we do, or it was something that we did 10 or 15 years ago, so it's kind of irrelevant. And this really seeks to avoid that. So where, my CTO always uses the example of data analyst. So certainly he has data analysis in his resume, but we wouldn't want to serve him up an opportunity for data analyst because he's a CTO, right? So the AI is smart enough and has been learning long enough to understand the context and the application of those skills, understand that he manages people that has that skill, not necessarily use that skill in his everyday life. So that's a really, really important factor. I mean, at the end of the day, the relevancy, the quality of the match is the most important thing. So, all of our attention spans are minute these days, right? So, you get one bad recommendation from company A, you're not paying attention to company A the second time, right? You've checked out there. So really, really important for us that the quality of the match is spot on. So that's why a lot of attention and resource and development time and brain power has been, laser focused on that contextual part.
Got it. And it sounds as though when we say this contextual part, it's essentially coaxing out, not only is there a keyword on this profile, but which of these skills is genuinely prominent in terms of this person's career trajectory and skills. Like you said, your CTO, if he's been a CTO for however many years, clearly that's more relevant than when 14 years ago he might have had some kind of a data analyst related position. I take it that in general, what the algorithm is doing is sort of, again, figuring out of these skill sets, which of these genuinely matter, which of these should we be bringing forth matches to versus, I don't know how it worked historically, but it's the way you articulated, it almost sounded like it was just keywords back in the day.
Yeah, semantic, rudimentary word search for sure.
Okay.
Yeah. I think the other thing that Rebecca and I talked about earlier today is that the job description is the most flawed asset, really, most people have, right? They're normally old and dated and, don't necessarily drive the most desired outcome. So what we do is we also assign a success profile to that. We complement the job description that the client has with a success profile given us by the client. So, if I could take 100 of Rebecca's, I would. So I give Rebecca's profile and that becomes the success profile. And now you have an enhanced asset, an enhanced job description that the client gets to keep, right? So now we've enhanced their library, if you will, of job descriptions. And then the AI creates a DNA of that role based on skills needed to serve that job description. And it's all kinds of skills from this is the majority of it to this is like the simplicity of it, right? So that DNA also helps drive the accuracy of that match. So in the example that Rebecca gave you, it's not that our CTO no longer touches data analytics. It's just that he now owns data analytics as an organization within our firm and people in it that do data analytics, right? Where he was once a data analyst himself long ago. So it's just contextually smart. And that matters because in a word search, right, you are just going to see data analytics and you might think, oh, yeah, this is a good match, right? So often people, I'm sure you too, Dan, get, served up opportunities from time to time from various places. And they're like, oh, you're suited for this job. And you're like, I was suited for it 20 years ago, but not today.
Yeah.
And it's really, it's in addition to that, right? How do you keep a recruiter potentially that handles that front end of the process? How do you keep them fresh? There's so many new things. That's where the technology really comes into play, right? So if historically a recruiter would need to know it's Java plus software development plus this plus that, not this, if then, all of those things, if we can automate that work, which is what we've done here, it really, it transforms the process and it corrects for things like, well, what if the person has Java developer and you're keyword matching for software developer? Well, you won't find them. But in this model, you're really looking for the whole skills adjacency. So not just that word, but what are all the associated things around that word, if that makes sense. So it really brings you back a more robust match list and really, really can be transformative for the recruiter in their work.
Got it. And it sounds as though, you made there was a very interesting comment mentioned here that the something like the job listing is often the most flawed kind of element in this whole mix. So that's sad but true. But it sounds like it's a reality in your industry that really has to be wrestled with. You folks are leveraging technology that's, going beyond a simple semantic search to be able to make sense of these unstructured, often goofily laid out documents. When you think about the future of your space, what are the other kinds of bits of data that are going to fit into the mix here? From, people can imagine, I imagine, social profiles and personality tests of various kinds and other sorts of data sources that might inform a otherwise kind of dead document that you had said is often kind of the source of our flaws. What other, in the years ahead moving forward, what are the ways that we're going to be able to get around that stodgy document?
Yeah, so I would say as the AI develops, well, first of all, the interesting thing is it's probably not years, because I feel like AI is kind of like dog years, but in reverse. Like things happen really quickly and changes are coming fast. But I think to the degree that we can automate future success, so, plug into the source of success for a particular client or particular program. So if that manager continues to hire people, plug in and let the success profile be kind of self-fulfilling, right? So keep telling us who is successful in that role. And over time, the success profile gets more robust. And so ultimately, if the success profile gets more robust, the math just gets better and better and better over time, right? So the more data that you can put in upon which the AI can learn what success looks like, right, the better off you are. So it's really just a combination of data and time.
Yeah. I would add that in the future, when we're working on it now, is one of our goals outside of the candidate, but for the candidate, is to make sure that we make the database of any particular client as valuable as possible, right? So enterprise companies spend a ton of money and time on their database, branding, marketing, bringing people into their database, and that database gets stale fast, right? And then the recruiters are really recruiting from the top, right? From the most recent, whatever you make that, the last year, the last 2 years, whatever the case may be. So we have an AI career progression model that we are going to refine and enhance coming up that would allow for, if Rebecca came into a database of any enterprise client 3 years ago when she was doing X, a normal trajectory would say that by today she might be doing Y, and then allow us the opportunity to go out into the universe, scrape, and see if there's any evidence of that prediction being true, and or reaching out to Rebecca directly to say, okay, we believe that you might be doing this today and we have opportunities. Can you please come into the application and update your profile or register? So that's going to mean that we can enrich that data for the client and bring it up and make it all that much more valuable in terms of always recruiting to the top of it all the time. So data enrichment models, career progression are all top of mind. And then on the candidate side, I guess I would add that earlier I said that we were looking to add some consultation back to the candidate about, geez, if you had these skill sets too, this might offer you an opportunity to do X or Y, and your, ability to earn might be Y or X, right, over time. We'd really like to offer that consultation around skills, and then potentially in the future even make recommendations about where they might gain access to those skills or assessments or certifications that they would need to further enhance their ability to be a match for roles in the future. So we're excited about that too, because that will expand that candidate universe that we're so interested in serving and adding value.
Yeah, and I think that there's such a tremendous return on the career progression model for an enterprise client, right? If you think about, what did we always say in sales, like the cost of acquiring a new customer versus keeping the ones you have. Think about the volumes of candidate data that a company has, and many companies, they're never purging that data, right? They're keeping it around infinity. So tackling that with technology and breathing life back into it, the return on the investment there is really, really significant. So get after an asset that you already have, own, et cetera, and just make it more valuable for you.
Earlier, Dan, we mentioned that we enjoy being a proprietary AI model because we have the ability to build AI models and applications to specific use cases. And a good example of that was the opportunity to build a military predictor model based on interest from a client who has a significant veterans organization within their firm. And that was really great work that allowed us to kind of build a military skills dictionary, if you would, based on MOS of the military and test it against our own talent community and allow ourselves access to, is the prediction around this candidate based on the words that they use and the way they use them, the skills that they have and the way they've used the skills contextually, could we predict that this person is a veteran? And, the test went remarkably well. And we're hoping to kind of reverse that and come up with a solution that allows us to help veterans understand how their skills best translate to civilian work and what that work is called and the skills that they would need to do it and why they have it based on their military experience. So that's just one example of specific client use cases that we will continue to build in the future.
Got it. And this is taking us into our last question, which is kind of the vision of the future. You guys are already going there, and we've got a couple examples. I'll try to put some pins in and make sure I'm digesting them properly here for the listeners. One of them was around not just providing better matches, which certainly makes sense, but being able to even open up the pool by saying, hey, if you had this certification or if you had a little bit more experience here, here's the other kinds of opportunities that would be there for you. It would seem as though in a platform kind of ecosystem where a candidate can go to many different providers, they might want to go with the provider who can not only tell them what the jobs are now, but the jobs in the future. It feels like this is part of the competitive edge, if I'm hearing you guys correctly.
Yeah, I think being really prescriptive about, what skills would carry them forward today and in the future, to your point, right? And part of that for us is plugging into sources of future demand, right? So how do we understand and how do we plug in sources of future demand into the technology to be a bit smarter, a bit more automated about that? So, relatively straightforward to understand what demand you have today and certainly historically what you've had, but what are the jobs of the future, right? So I think we would be thinking about, how do we plug in some of that information to make that consult back to the candidate be really valuable?
Got it. And you had mentioned this example around veterans, which I think is an interesting future vision here. We can sort of wrap up on this. You had mentioned the idea of being able to help veterans take the skills that they've developed and built and say, hey, here's where you might fit in really well. Here's the kinds of paid opportunities that could suit you very well. Would this involve the drinking in of their, I don't know what else to call it, but a sort of military resume, so to speak, or different kinds of documents about their past experience? What kinds of information would we need from a veteran in order to potentially in the future do this kind of matching to showcase those private sector opportunities?
Well, the good news is the future is now because that model is built. And it's exactly as you described, a traditional resume or just kind of a summary of their experience even suffices, because what the model does is it will help us understand you have all these words and concepts and phrases in a military career. How does that translate, to Lori's point, into civilian life? What are the things, if you have, these various combinations of experiences or words on your military CV, what does that look like in the civilian world? You're a project manager or you're an operations leader or whatever the case may be. So that foundational work is already done. So really now it's just about expanding the footprint of use cases for that, of utilization of that.
Got it. And so there's as you'd mentioned, sort of, you can take these rough, I imagine often extremely unstructured documents of their past history and find ways to tie and append that to jobs, job categories, skill sets that are potentially available in your platform there.
Yeah, because the technology really, it's not super sensitive to format of the document or anything like that, right? So it can be relatively raw, the information, and we'll parse out and kind of translate so that the AI can do its job. So that part is relatively straightforward.
It's translating against a library that we built and a taxonomy that is specific to words and concepts that would be used in an MOS job description in the military. So that's how we know.
Got it. Okay. Yep. So there's been some of that upfront work to be able to have proper coding, so to speak, but then you can use that lexicon or that taxonomy to append it to other jobs. Cool.
And that's really the work that we partnered with NLP on. So that was a great collaboration. It was a wonderful use case. We had an active client that had a need for it. And now we're really hoping to repurpose that across a broader set.
Excellent. Well, I hope that this, for the folks who are tuned in, I hope that this is a nice showcase of sort of what near-term applications are, but also where this technology is taking us. As was just mentioned, the future is now. And Rebecca and Lori, I think you guys have made that a pretty clear showcase in terms of the developments that you guys have. I know that's all that we have for time for this episode, but I sincerely appreciate you both sharing your expertise and being able to be with us in this series. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having us, Dan. We appreciate it.
Thanks so much, Dan.
For more in this series, visit nlplogix.com. That's Logix with an X.